A family of 4 disappeared during a camping trip in the forest, which were presumed victims of a tragic wild accident. But 3 weeks later, a wild camera in the woods captures something that makes everyone question what really happened, revealing a truth so gripping no one could have imagined. The wind whistled across Busan National Park, Jersey, carrying with it the promise of another cold front. Meredith Smith, known to most as Edith, came out of the car to scan the environment, which seemed way too nice for camping. This one was of the time where she needed the time with her family after being always away from them for years. She was going to sue what was captured to find the truth about what happened. At 69, her steps were smart and confident, the gaze of someone who had traversed these woods for a while now as a result of work projects relating to wildlife. Her blue eyes scanned the bright woods path ahead. The visibility was poor, but that didn't concern her. She knew these trails better than most. She had walked them, taught them, rescued people from them for over a few years as a park ranger and wilderness survival instructor for decades. She adjusted her backpack and made her way toward the little mini tent lodge that served as a waypoint for visitors. Its wooden structure stood resolute against the mountainside, smoke curling from the chimney. As she dropped her heavy pack in the foyer, stamping snow from her boots, a familiar face looked up from behind the counter. "Miss Meredith?" The local clerk's face brightened with recognition. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon." "Hello, Tommy," Meredith acknowledged, her voice carrying the weight of her purpose. Tommy leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Any news about your family?" Meredith shook her head, lines deepening around her eyes. "Not yet," she replied, unzipping her jacket sadly. "That's why I'm back to find out what really happened." He nodded understandably. Everyone in town knew about the Smith family tragedy. Trent, Meredith's son, along with his wife Ruby, and their twin girls Iana and Niana, had been missing for nearly 2 months now. What started as a routine weekend vacation had turned into every family's nightmare. Meredith pulled out a stack of missing person posters from her pack. The top one showed a smiling family of 4. Trent in his stocky blue hoodie, Ruby with her warm smile, and the twins, Iana in bright purple and Ren in yellow. Their matching grins revealing identical gaps where baby teeth had fallen out. "I look at this every day, and it haunts me to face the reality that they were missing, or even worse," she said, holding the stack out slightly around the lodge and at the trailheads. "Of course," Tommy replied without hesitation. "Anything to help?" The manager already approved it. "He said to tell you if there's anything else we can do, just ask." "Thank you," Meredith said, grateful for the kindness that had been shown to her throughout this ordeal. As she moved through the tent, pinning posters to bulletin boards and near entrances, Edith couldn't help but replay the events of that day in her mind. It had been a typical Saturday morning when Trent called, inviting her to join their camping. "Come on, Mama," he'd said, with a playful voice over the phone. The girls have been asking for their Grandma Edith stories all week. You can imagine how interesting it would be during the camp. She'd wanted to go, had almost canceled her other plans, but the charity event she'd committed to months before couldn't be rescheduled. It was a fundraiser for wilderness education for underprivileged youth, a cause close to her heart. "Next time," she promised, "take lots of pictures for me." She told them, and they had. Midday, as she was setting up displays at the charity event, her phone buzzed with a message from Trent. It was a perfect family portrait, the 4 of them smiling broadly against the backdrop of the mountains. It had seemed like such a sweet, sentimental idea. Hours later, when the charity event had wrapped up and Edith returned home, she noticed several missed calls from Trent. There was a text message, too. "Weather turning bad up here, like it's about to bring a storm. We want to explore the forest, Mama. Talk later. I love you." She tried calling him back immediately, but the call went straight to voicemail. Ruby's phone did the same. At first, Edith had told herself not to worry. Cell service was notoriously spotty in parts of the park and forest, but when evening came and they still hadn't returned, the worry solidified into fear. That night, she'd call the police. By morning, search parties were combing the most frequently used trails. After a week of intense searching with helicopters scanning from above and teams on foot below, the police had begun to voice what Edith refused to accept: the likelihood of finding them alive was diminishing by the day. Ms. Smith, the search coordinator, had said gently, "We've covered every likely area at this point with the weather systems that move through. I'm sorry, but we have to consider the possibility of a tragic accident or an encounter with a wild animal." But Edith knew her son. Trent was experienced in these forests. The animals were never going to attack in the day or night, except they went into the deepest part of the forest, which was crossing the boundaries. He had grown up respecting their dangers. He would never have put his family at risk, would have read the weather signs, know what season of wild animals would likely attack, would have sought shelter or turned back before things got dangerous. Something else had happened, something beyond a simple forest camp accident, which is why, despite the police scaling back their search efforts, Edith had returned to the forest. If no one else would find her family, she would do it herself. Edith continued her methodical posting of the missing person flyers along the hiking trail, stopping hikers as they passed to ask if they'd seen her family. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Sympathetic eyes, shaking heads, mumbled hopes for a happy ending. After the 20th, "No, sorry," Edith had almost resigned herself to another day of disappointment. Then, as she secured a flyer to a trail marker about 2 miles ahead, a figure emerged from between the trees to her right. A man in his 60s, dressed in camouflage with a blue safety vest, approached her with purposeful strides. "Excuse me," he called out, his breath visible in the cold air. "Mind if I take one of those?" Edith turned, studying him. He had the weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in a thick beard peppered with gray and alert eyes that seemed to catalog everything around him. "Of course," she replied, handing him a flyer. "Name's Clark James," he said, extending a gloved hand. "Local hunter, been coming to these woods for 30 years for my researches." Edith shook his hand. "Meredith Smith, friend call me Edith." Recognition flashed in his eyes. "The ranger heard a lot about you over the years. Respect what you've done for the park." Clark studied the flyer intently, his brow furrowing. "When did you say they went missing?" 3 weeks ago." She shook her head sadly. "Almost 2 months now." Clark reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small device. I think I should check something. I've got trail cameras set up for tracking game movements." Ellie's pulse quickened. "You think you might have caught something? Maybe worth looking?" Clark manipulated the device's screen, scrolling through what appeared to be a series of photos and video clips. His movements became slower, more deliberate as he focused on particular segments. "What is it?" Edith asked, unable to contain her hope. "Did you see something?" Clark didn't answer immediately. Instead, he continued reviewing footage, occasionally glancing between the screen and the flyer in his hand. Then he stopped, his finger hovering over the display. "Miss Smith, I think you should see this." He turned the device toward her. The footage was grainy. The forest around it shrouded in tall trees and mist, but Ellie's heart nearly stopped when 3 figures moved across the frame. A woman with shoulder-length hair and 2 small children, all moving with evident caution through the underbrush. The woman wore a light-colored jacket, coral blue or black, while the children were dressed in blue and yellow. "That's them," Edith whispered, her voice catching. "That's Ruby and the twins." Clark nodded, his expression grave. "I thought it might be. Look at the timestamp." The date in the corner of the screen showed that the footage had been captured just 5 days ago. 5 days? Ellie's voice rose with disbelief and renewed hope. "They're alive, but where's Trent? My son should be with them." Clark zoomed in as much as the footage quality would allow. "This is a fixed camera. It only captures what passes directly in front of it. Your son could have been walking behind them, or he might have taken a different route. There's no way to tell from just this." Edith stared at the frozen image, drinking in the sight of her family. They looked worn and shaken, moving with the cautious steps of those navigating unfamiliar terrain. At one point, they had turned slightly toward the camera, but didn't seem to notice it, likely well hidden for its intended purpose of tracking wildlife undetected. "Where exactly was this taken?" Edith asked, urgency in her voice. "The police never went that far north because they said it was too dangerous." "Clark, I need a copy of this footage. I need to show it to the police immediately." Clark nodded, already working on transferring the file. "I can email it to you right now." And here he scribbled on a small notepad. "Is my number. Call me if you need anything else." I know those northern reaches pretty well. Thank you, Edith said, her voice thick with emotion. This is the first real lead we've had in weeks. I hope it helps, Clark replied, and I hope you find him safe. As they finished the file transfer, Clark checked his watch. I need to head back down. Getting late, and I've got what I came for already. He gestured to his hunting pack. Will you be all right? Yes, Edith said, clutching her phone with the precious footage. I'm going back to my tent to call the police right away. Her heart raced with possibilities. Her family was alive, at least as of 3 days ago. The police would have to restart the search now. They'd have to look in areas they'd previously dismissed. When they reached the lodge, Clark tipped his hat to her. Remember, call if you need anything. Good luck, Miss Smith. Thank you, Clark, Edith replied, watching as he headed toward the parking area. She turned and hurried toward her rented tent, new determination in every step. For the first time in weeks, she felt something beyond grief and desperation. She felt hope. The moment Edith entered her cabin, she pulled out her phone and dialed the police department. Her fingers trembled slightly as she navigated to the save contact for Detective Marshall, the lead officer on her family's case. Detective Monroe speaking, came the prompt answer. This is Meredith Smith, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I found evidence that my family is alive. There was a brief pause before the detective responded. What kind of evidence, Miss Smith? Video footage from a trail camera. It shows Ruby and the twins moving through the forest just 5 days ago. Edith explained the encounter with Clark and the location where the footage had been captured. I'm sending you the video now, she continued, pulling up her email. You need to see this, detective. We need to restart the search immediately. As Monroe reviewed the footage, Edith paced the small tent, glancing occasionally at the little hole window where daylight was already beginning to fade. It was nearly 4 p.m., and this time of year, darkness fell quickly in the forests. This does appear to be your daughter-in-law and granddaughters, Marshall conceded after a moment. However, Miss Meredith, we can't begin a search operation this late in the day. What do you mean? Edith demanded. They're out there right now. She almost yelled. I understand your urgency, Monroe replied, his tone measured. But as a former park ranger, you know better than anyone the dangers of nighttime search operations in this terrain. The area you're describing is particularly treacherous. Edith moved to the window, watching as park rangers were already guiding visitors and tourist viewers back down the woods trails. Dark clouds were gathering above the peaks, promising more snow. The forecast is calling for another snowfall tonight. Monroe continued. We can't risk sending teams into unmarked territory with limited visibility and deteriorated conditions. We'd only be creating more potential victims. As much as it pained her, Edith knew he was right. She had conducted enough rescue operations herself to understand the protocols and the reasoning behind them. What about helicopters? She asked, grasping at alternatives. Not in these conditions, and certainly not at night, Monroe replied. Additionally, from what I can see in this footage, they don't appear to be in immediate distress. They're moving purposefully, not like people who are critically injured or lost. Edith sank into a chair, struggling with the frustration of knowing her family was so close, yet still unreachable. So, we wait until morning first light, Monroe confirmed. I'll coordinate with the park authorities tonight. We'll assemble teams and plan the safest approach to that area. Miss Smith, I promise you we will do everything possible to find them tomorrow. I understand, she said reluctantly, but I want to be part of the search team. Given your experience, I think that can be arranged. Just be at the ranger station by 6 a.m. He told her, and after ending the call, Edith sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the frozen image of Ruby and the twins on her phone. They were alive, but something wasn't right. Where's Trent? Why hadn't he been with them on the camera footage? Clark's explanation that Trent might have been out of frame or taking a different route made logical sense. But Edith knew her son. He would never have separated from his family in remote, dangerous terrain, especially with the twins. Would Trent wait until morning if it were her missing in the forest? The answer came immediately. No, he wouldn't rest until he found her. With renewed resolve, Edith finished just enough of her meal to stave off hunger, then quietly slipped away from the gathering. No one seemed to notice her departure as she made her way back to her cabin. Once inside, she moved with purpose. From her bags, she pulled out her most reliable camping boots, equipment that had seen her through countless wilderness challenges. Her old search and rescue pack still meticulously organized with emergency supplies, first aid kit, and survival tools. She checked her GPS device, ensuring she had both online maps and offline backups loaded. Clark's coordinates were already marked. She packed extra batteries, energy bars, and her sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures. As she worked, a small voice of caution whispered that she was being reckless. But a stronger voice, the voice that had guided her through 3 decades of wilderness rescue, reminded her that every hour mattered in survival situations. And if there was anyone who could safely navigate these forest and adverse conditions, it was her. With her pack secured, Edith slipped out of her cabin, carefully avoiding the main paths where she might be seen. She pulled her headlamp from her pocket, but kept it off for now, not wanting to draw attention as she moved past the dimly lit tents. Once she reached the trailhead, she paused to orient herself. According to Clark's GPS coordinates, she needed to head northwest, away from the maintained trails and into the less traveled wilderness. It would be a challenging journey, even in daylight. In the growing darkness and snowfall, it would test every skill she possessed. But her family was out there, and she was going to find them. Edith switched on her headlamp, took a deep breath of the cold mountain air, and began her ascent. As the hours passed, the temperature plummeted further. Her feet burned, and the woods grew thicker. The wind picked up, driving the trees horizontally, stinging any exposed skin. Ellie's lips began to feel numb, her fingers stiff despite her insulated gloves. She heard noises, growls, and the realization dawned on her that she was approaching her limits. If the conditions worsened any further, she might be in trouble with the animals. Just as she was considering her options for setting up an emergency camp, a faint glow caught her eye through the curtain of snow. At first she thought it might be a trick of light or her own exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. But as she moved cautiously forward, the glow resolved into what unmistakably appeared to be a window. Light spilling from a structure nestled among the trees. A cabin. In this remote section of wilderness, someone had built a cabin. Hope surged through Ellie's tired body. If nothing else, it offered shelter from the increasingly dangerous storm and dark, scary sounds. At best, it might hold answers about her family. She approached carefully, her headlamp illuminating a small, sturdy structure partially protected by the surrounding pines. Smoke curled from a chimney, confirming that someone was inside. With trembling hands from cold or anticipation, she couldn't tell, Edith knocked on the wooden door. No response came. She knocked again, louder this time, and called out, "Hello, is anyone there? Please, I need help." Several long moments passed in silence. Then, just as she was about to knock a third time, the door creaked open. Edith found herself staring into a face she had seen only in photographs and missing person posters for the past 3 weeks. Ruby stood in the doorway, her expression frozen in shock. For a heartbeat, neither woman moved. Then Ruby seemed to snap out of her stunned state and rushed forward, pulling Edith inside. "Edith, how? What are you doing here?" Ruby stammered, helping her mother-in-law shed her snow-covered outer layer. Before Edith could respond, small voices called from deeper in the cabin. "Mom, who is it?" 2 small figures peered from behind a wooden chair frame. Iana and Niana, their eyes widening as they recognized their grandmother. "Grandma Edith." They cried in unison, rushing forward, but stopping short, suddenly shy or uncertain. Edith sank to her knees, overcome by emotion and exhaustion. The warmth of the cabin's fire began to thaw her frozen extremities, sending painful tingles through her hands and feet. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the flood of relief at seeing her granddaughters alive. As the initial shock began to wear off, questions flooded Ellie's mind. But the most pressing one pushed its way to her lips first. "Ruby," she said quietly, keeping her voice low enough not to wake the twins who went asleep. "Where's Trent?" Ruby's face fell at the mention of Trent's name. She moved to the small wooden table in the center of the cabin and sank into a chair, gesturing for Edith to join her. Edith lowered herself into the chair opposite Ruby, still warming her hands around the mug. Edith pressed. "What happened? Where's my son?" she asked again. Ruby's eyes filled with tears. "We had an accident," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "That day we went into the woods. We didn't check the weather forecast properly this season for animals. We ended up caught in that terrible snowstorm and a wild elephant outbreak 4 weeks ago." "But why were you up here?" Edith asked, struggling to keep her voice calm. "This area is marked as dangerous on all the park maps. Trent knows better than to bring children into this zone." Ruby bit her lip. He wanted to try something different. "We've been visiting the same trails for years, and the girls are getting bored. He thought we would just explore a little ways into the less traveled areas, but then the storm hit, so suddenly going back seemed more dangerous than pressing forward, and the animals," she paused, wiping at her eyes. "They all ran out in fear too, which scared us all. We were lucky to find this cabin. It saved our lives that first night." Edith nodded, understanding how a shelter in such conditions would have been a godsend. But she still didn't have her answer. "And Trent," she prompted. Ruby's face crumpled, and for a moment she couldn't speak. When she finally found her voice again, it was broken with grief. "We got lost that night, and the next morning, when the snow had let up a little, we didn't find him. I waited. Hours turned into a day. Another storm moved in, worse than the first. I couldn't leave the girls alone to go looking for him." "Did you ever find him?" Edith asked, her throat tight with dread. Ruby shook her head, tears now flowing freely. "After the second storm passed, I tried to search nearby, but with the twins, I couldn't go far. And then more bad weather came. We've been trapped here, scared that we'll get attacked by the animals again, waiting for conditions to improve enough to try making it back to the main trails." Ellie's heart felt as though it was being squeezed in a vice. "So, Trent is—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't know for certain," Ruby admitted, "but it's been 4 weeks. I've had to accept that something bad might have happened." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. After a moment, Edith asked the question that had been nagging at her since she arrived. "But why did you stay here?" Edith asked, turning back to Ruby. "It's been 4 weeks. Surely there were breaks in the weather when you could have tried to make it back down." Ruby's expression grew haunted. "I was afraid. Maybe if it was just me, I might have risked it. But with the twins, after losing Trent," she shook her head. "I couldn't bear the thought of something happening to them, too. So, we stayed using the supplies we found here." Edith rose from her chair, suddenly needing to move. She walked to the kitchen area and examined the shelves more closely. Most of the food was canned, beans, soups, vegetables, but there were also packages of dried meat and a milk that looked relatively fresh. "These supplies," Edith said, picking up one of the milk boxes. "They don't seem like they've been sitting here for years." "No," Ruby agreed. "I think someone uses this cabin regularly. A hunter, maybe. There's enough here to last us a while longer." Edith set the milk down and moved to dispose of her empty mug. As she approached the small trash bin near the door, something caught her eye. A glint of metal beneath a loose floorboard. Crouching down, she examined the area more closely. "There's something under here," she murmured. Ruby quickly stood and moved toward her. "What is it?" Edith worked her fingers into the gap between the boards and lifted. The floorboard came up easily, revealing a small space beneath. There, nestled in the dust, was a man's ring, a wedding band with a distinctive diamond inlay. Edith's breath caught as she lifted it out. The ring was clean, unmarred by scratches or dirt one might expect if it had been lost beneath the floor for any length of time. "This is Trent's wedding ring," she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. Ruby stared at it, her expression unreadable for a moment before she reached for it. "It must have slipped off his finger that first night," she said quickly. "Like, subscribe and share for the second part of what happened to Trent and what Edith found."